we go. Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. This is, oh, and actually I see Amy Wong is about to connect in, so I'll wait and let her introduce herself.
All right.
Hey, Amy, can you hear us? Oh, not quite yet. Hi, Amy.
Hi there.
Want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm another member of the editorial board, and I'm the newsletters and special projects editor, and I'm sitting in my backyard.
Nice.
Jealous. And so thanks very much. We have Carmen Rubio and Candace Avalos with us today, talking with us about their campaigns for City Council position #1. And I thought we'd just first start off by giving each of you a chance to give us just a brief intro about who you are and why you're running and why you're the best candidate for this position. And why don't we start with Candace, if you wouldn't mind going first?
Absolutely. So hi everyone, it's nice to meet you again. My name is Candace Avalos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently work at Portland State University teaching students about civic engagement, working with the student government and the Greek life. I identify as a Black Tina. So what that means is my mom actually was brought to the States from Guatemala in the 70s. So my family on that side, Guatemalan immigrants, and then also on my dad's side, they grew up in deep South Jim Crow, Virginia, honestly. So I say that because it really does shape my perspective and how I feel my voice is important in this race and in general in politics. So, you know, I became an educator. That was the way that I felt I could have the most impact on my community. And so I started out actually teaching English as a second language in high school, and then went back to school to get my master's of education in college student personnel, which is what I do at PSU. So, you know, I teach my students all the time that they are important and that their voices are really necessary in this political process. That's what I've dedicated my career to. So I got involved in the city, and I'm actually the acting chair of the Citizen Review Committee, which is a police accountability board. So that, you know, combined with my experiences in my career as an educator, and then I just did the Emerge Oregon program last year, when Amanda Fritz announced that she wasn't running. And I contemplated it for a bit and thought about what I thought I could bring to City Hall. And what it came down to for me was I felt there was a voice of a younger generation that was missing. I look at my students, I look at how they're being impacted, especially in the age of coronavirus, how they have been economically disadvantaged, and I count myself in that. And I feel that moving forward, you know, not only do we need to transform how we engage people. We live in the 21st century, we're in the digital age, and you know, 93% of people in Multnomah County have access to the internet. So I think that we need to leverage that, and, you know, of course, think about how people that don't have that access don't, you know, how they're engaging, but that's also why I support municipal broadband, bringing that to Portland. But anyway, I feel like I have a voice around this generation that really needs decisions to be made that are going to help our future, whether that's on climate, on the economy, different areas of government transparency and accountability. And that's what I feel that I will bring to City Hall.
Great. And Carmen, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Sure. So first, I'm running because I believe that Portland is a city that should be accessible and representative of all of us in Portland. And also because in the midst of all that's happening right now, we need elected leaders who understand that their role goes beyond just managing bureaus and legislating. It means advocating for Portlanders, pushing to change systems and to be responsive and adaptive to current needs as we're seeing right now play out right in front of us. I grew up in a Mexican family with farm worker roots in Washington County, and having the experiences that I did sparked in me a desire for justice, mainly because I saw and understood what was happening when, you know, witnessing treatment of my family or the experiences that we had growing up. And so it really sparked that desire for justice and also respect for the working poor and the vulnerable communities. And that's why since then I've dedicated my entire career to working on behalf of our community and putting my values into practice through my work. I believe I'm the best choice for voters in this race because I can hit the ground running. I am an experienced manager, I'm a collaborator, and have a strong grounding in the community. And my track record and experiences have prepared me to serve in this role, including my past work with as a policy advisor to Commissioner Serena Cruz, to Mayor Tom Potter, and Commissioner Nick Fish. And also on top of that, and probably in my belief more importantly, the last 10 years of experience in the community, managing and growing leading immigrant and Latinx culturally specific nonprofit that serves community through programs and also challenges the government to do better by these children and families. You know, my priorities are what a lot of our priorities are: housing and homelessness, a more representative government, affordability, environmental and climate justice, and also community-centered development. Because in my time in the city and working with the city in multiple ways that I've engaged and imbued via my job or as a person with my identity, I've seen the impact of when it works and when it doesn't work. And so I'm really committed. I have the relationships. I believe I have the judgment and professional experience it takes to get things done. And I bring the lived experience and commitment to representing the voters and all residents, including non-voters, which we don't often talk about, that live in Portland.
Well, thank you very much. And before we jump into questions, I see Theresa Bottomly has joined us. Theresa, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? Oops, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, too many Zoom meetings today. Sorry. Theresa Bottomly, Vice President of Content, Editor of the Oregonian OregonLive. Thank you for taking time to take part in this process.
Great. Great, thank you. So I think what we'll do is, you know, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then other editorial board members will. We'll try to kind of remember to go back and forth, like who goes first. Let me know if I get off track in terms of who is supposed to go first. But Carmen, why don't we start with you, and let's, you know, go straight to the biggest issue facing us, and that's you know, the coronavirus pandemic, which has been both a public health and an economic crisis. What would you do as a city councilor to help Portland withstand and recover from both those hits in the coming months?
Well, I believe that, you know, when I submitted my response to you earlier, it was like right on the cusp of our lead, you know, the changing direction politically that our leaders took. And I'm really, really glad that they did take that stance. I think that sometimes in these moments of crisis, sometimes you have to do things and push an agenda that may be, you know, fraught with challenges, or you have a different perspective. And I just really think that Mayor Wheeler took a really great leadership role in pushing for this. And obviously it comes with some costs, but, you know, lives must be prioritized at all costs over everything else, in my opinion. I think the things that we can do in this role are absolutely be great collaborators, know exactly what our resources are that we bring to bear, and then do what we can to position ourselves within our jurisdiction as good intra-jurisdictional collaborators within the region, with the state, but also looking at every single sector. And that doesn't just mean government. Obviously there's intergovernmental collaboration happening here, but also we're starting to see more organic and episodic episodes of or instances of community-based partnerships with government, or business and government partnerships, or business and community partnerships with education around these things. And it would be great if if we had capacity within city government to act as a marshal of all of these resources, particularly with our nonprofit community and philanthropic community. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to reach the hardest hit, and those that are, you know, not, you know, are less able to be responsive or get their needs met. I read the article today about how Latinx communities are incredibly overrepresented in this pandemic. And so that's something to teach us. The other thing is use of real data in real time to track the progress of these things, so that we can truly understand the scale and scope of impact and be transparent with community in that, and also with community partners and businesses. I think all these things set the foundation for us to begin planning now then. So as we're watching things happen in real time, to start big planning now for that economic recovery and community response recovery that we need to be thinking about now. I mean, just in the last few days, we've seen that our curve is flattening, and also our peak is sooner than we thought. So with these factors, we should be able to recalibrate if we're starting to plan those things now for recovery.
And Candace, how about you? In terms of the coronavirus pandemic and the public health and economic implications it'll have, what would you do as city councilor to help Portland recover from these hits in the coming months?
Well, I think that it's definitely shown a lot of root problems that we have. And, you know, whether that's how people of color are disproportionately blocked from access to things like healthcare or good services to be housed and be fed, and how young people are being disproportionately impacted by this in this, you know, kind of gig economy where, you know, people are going to school and they're trying to make ends meet and they can't afford to live anywhere. And, you know, there's just this kind of storm that's going on. And I feel like at the root of it, we're really going to need to, this is the time that people are looking to government and they're saying, oh, we actually need you. We need you to make these decisions for us, and we need you to take action. And, you know, we have had an eroding trust in government for a long time, but especially in the last couple of years. And so I think that this is a pivotal moment for city council and all government, but especially city council, to rebuild that trust that has been lost with Portlanders. And I think that it's really exacerbating this need for how we communicate things. Like, for example, my campaign manager is actually a small business owner. She owns a hair salon. And so I've been getting some good perspective from her about what it's been like for her trying to apply for grants. And, you know, but like we saw a bunch of people applied, I think it was like 11,000, and 200 grants were dispersed. And now there's this loan program, and there's all these different efforts that are happening across different jurisdictions that, you know, as I hear from her, are difficult to navigate. And then I hear from my students and from my friends that, you know, have lost their jobs and have, you know, have limited options now, how those resources that supposedly we are dispersing are also hard to navigate. So I think that it's really important as a whole that we're looking at what the role the government has in responding to generally to a crisis. Because these kinds of things come up, right? And I think that the government has to be prepared to have systems in place to disperse resources immediately, to make quick decisions on where we can put our funds in different places. And then I also think that it has really shined a light on the houselessness problem, in the sense that, for example, they dispersed some new sanitation and water stations, and it's like, that's great, obviously we need that in a public health crisis, but we've been asking for that for a long time. You know, we've been asking for people that are houseless to have these basic needs that they need to get around in their day-to-day, and that's, you know, as something as simple as having a shower and washing your hands. So I think that it's also an opportunity. Well, frankly, the people are looking at this and they're saying, oh, so we can do these things. We can take urgency and make decisions that are going to have an immediate and quick impact on the lives of everyday people. And so I think we're going to have a lot of pressure now going in. I'm definitely feeling that going into, you know, office possibly, that, you know, what is possible it looks different now. And I think people are really going to expect that the government play the role in being the safety net that we all thought it was supposed to be and that we needed to be. So I think overall, that's kind of how I see the bigger picture. And I also think that, you know, as basic as it sounds, leadership is so important, right? Because leadership is about how you bring these stakeholders together and unite these efforts. So you don't have these disparate things going on where, again, it's hard for the average person to navigate. So we really need to get our stuff together as different agencies and partner with, you know, the nonprofits and the businesses. And I think we have to really have a bigger picture for what we're doing. And it's also why I'm running on changing the form of government, because I think there's so many flaws in how, in general, city council is able to move on things. So again, I just feel like this is there's so many root problems that are coming up, and I think we're going to have a lot of pressure to do things differently coming out of this.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Okay. Kind of along those same lines, just in terms of with lower tax revenue, the city is going to be hard pressed. I mean, the city, the county, the state, the country is going to be hard pressed to provide the array of programs and level of service that it currently provides. So, you know, everything from public safety to funding the open and accountable election system. What should the city's mission and philosophy be in determining what gets funding and what does not? Like, for instance, can you kind of highlight what are the absolute mission critical functions that the city still needs to make sure that it's providing, and what would be the lower priorities or things that have to wait? And Candace, if you can go first on that.
That's a good question. And, you know, I think that one of the ways that I feel I bring some experience in general in this area is that in my work at Portland State, and when I advise the student government, we have something called the Student Fee Committee, and they're responsible for allocating the $18 million in student fees every year that go to fund my department, for example, and fund things, services that students ask for and need, like the Queer Resource Center and the Multicultural Centers, childcare services. And, you know, in that process, every year I have, you know, new students, excuse me, that we have to retrain them, right, on how to go about budgeting. And the conversation we always start with is, where are your values? And I think that's really important, because that ultimately is what people get elected to do. We elect people that reflect our values and our experiences, and we say, start there, because that is how you're going to be able to better prioritize where those resources go. And why it's so important that people like Carmen and I, for example, are running, because we are sharing a lived experience of people that have often been forgotten, especially, and I feel that really personally as, you know, the daughter of immigrants, that, you know, this whole American dream, right? That's something that we believed and we cared about. And I feel like my family really persevered in a lot of ways, but there were so many ways that they could have been better served by those tax dollars that they're paying into the system, right? So I think that, you know, as far as what specific things, obviously housing and houselessness. And for me, you know, we have a conversation all the time about, like, yes, we need to build more affordable housing and the housing market and all of that. But I think there are two critical parts that I don't personally hear enough about and what I'm really passionate about. One of those is, what are we doing with people that are on the streets? Because the reality is that we're not going to have housing for people overnight. There are people currently suffering on the streets. As a matter of fact, I live here over in the Hollywood neighborhood. And a couple of months ago, I had a tent appear at the end of my street, because I live on a dead-end street. And it was kind of a whirlwind for me, you know, watching those folks. It was like the tent started to grow, and you know, my neighbor came over and was like, there's needles in our trash can. Do you have needles in your trash can? We're concerned. And then my mom came to visit for Christmas, and we went and gave them some food and met them and talked to them a little bit. And, you know, then they're, you know, just hearing their stories and what they were going through. So I feel that really urgently. And I think that is where we're putting our resources on that specifically, like having more, you know, sanitation, water services, like self-governed spaces. I think that we really need to look more creatively at that, instead of just pushing people around and saying, here is a temporary spot where you're able to self-govern. We're going to give you the basic things that you need right now, and then we're going to continue to work through those other things that are going to help you get off the streets, right? That's one side of it. And then the other side of it, of course, is preventing people from getting on the streets. And that's when I talk about, you know, specifically people in my generation who, you know, I have astounding student loan debt, and it is extremely difficult to find a place to live and feel security. Even though I have a master's degree, I did everything right, you know, and it's still leaving me behind. And I think that that's really an important voice that I want to bring to City Hall, and that perspective, that day-to-day or paycheck to paycheck living, and how, you know, critical it is that we really assess the fragility of people and their housing and make sure that we're putting that money there first. So that's a big one for sure. I mean, and other issues that I really care about are police accountability. Obviously being the acting chair of that, I think that we need to put more resources into how we're training our police, but also what they're there to do. And things like Portland Street Response, I think it's a really good first step to, again, addressing that immediate need to people that are houseless and giving them other options than handcuffs and a jail cell, so that they can, instead of continuing to put them further in that cycle. So I think those are two really critical areas that I see, and they obviously intersect. And I want to see us overall change how we budget and make sure that we're doing our best to seek out that feedback from people and represent those values when we're deciding where our money goes.
Anything that comes to mind in terms of things that the city does that would automatically be a lower priority?
Okay. Lower priority, gosh, that's definitely tough, because I think the hardest thing about budgeting is personnel. Because you could easily say, oh, that's a lower priority, but ultimately that's people's lives that often, when you say it's a lower priority, it means jobs. So I think that's why it's hard to answer that question. I think ultimately the housing and houselessness needs to be first, probably less, even though it's hard to make that decision, but like, we're gonna have to put some, a pause on some redevelopment stuff until we can make sure that, the development of things that we need right away are prioritized. So I would say probably that, but I'm definitely gonna need to ponder that a little bit more. But I think that's my general response.
Great, thank you. Carmen, how about you? So again, just to repeat the question, with lower tax revenue, the city is going to be hard pressed to provide the same array of programs and level of services that it currently offers. So, in terms of like thinking about those limited resources, what should the city's mission and guiding philosophy be in determining what gets funding and what does not?
Well, especially in this time, you see during crisis that organizations from governments to businesses to nonprofits have to recalibrate around the reality that is now. I can speak from experience that's happening in real time for myself as a nonprofit director, but I run an organization that's annual budget is $10.2 million. We heavily rely on grants and contracts with government and also work heavily in schools in the Tri-County area. And so our work has dramatically been impacted, and we have had to radically shift and recalibrate how we're going to do this work. And where this is a great example of how government has been working very hand in hand with community partners and with nonprofit and philanthropy, is that they're quickly having to quickly assemble and make decisions about unencumbering our ability to use our contracts with more flexibility to adapt to the changing need of community members and residents and students and families. A lot of these the majority of these communities being low income and of color and immigrants. And so I think that's an example of what government needs to do during this time. It doesn't mean that you start doing things completely out of mission. It's actually more a time to double down on your core missions and your functions and your expertise. And that means really kind of sifting through what are the must-haves, what are fire life safety issues that we need to focus on versus what are the nice-to-haves, the capital projects or planning projects that can be on hold, and they need to be on hold because we have to focus on these core issues. In my organization, we've had to recalibrate, I'll give you an example of one program, school-based programs where we case manage students and provide in-school and after-school support. We don't have that ability to access them. So we've had to shift to online and via phone case management of these students and their families. It's no longer quite so focused on academic support, but the need has shifted to mental health support. Providing resources so that people can, and tools so that people know how to manage their anxiety, being homebound and being cut off, or having parents or family members that are exposed because they are frontline workers, a lot of them, or a lot of them unemployed workers now because of everything that's happening. And so our work has shifted from that case management of focus on academics to now looking at how do we be responsive to community needs? How do we get the families that are on our caseload groceries? How do we make sure that the parent that's laid off and is perhaps undocumented, doesn't have any eligibility for unemployment? How do we get supports for them? There are large scale efforts that are happening right now to sort of address these pocket issues, but we're having to work hand in glove with our local jurisdictions to make sure that there's coverage of those needs. And so where I would focus is at the city, making sure that we have all those fire life safety issues that are strong so that people can count on them in this time. The way they deliver the service or the issues that are emerging in crisis might look different than what we're familiar with in the past, but nevertheless, we need to be responsive and ensure that that lifeline or that touchstone or what the city provides as a core function is still something that community is able to rely on. Also, resources to community, if we have to recalibrate any flexible funds to adapt and align around a regional collaborative effort with the county or the state or metro or the Oregon Health Authority, any of those kinds of things, we need to be at the ready to do our part. Also making sure essential services and utilities continue, and that I think that our city government took the right steps within their jurisdiction to ensure that we have, these freezes on rent, and some of these things perhaps didn't go far enough, but at least there's capacity, and that is the role for the city to do. And protecting utilities, no shutting off utilities, things like that can really quickly make the life or death difference or survival difference for a lot of families in need that are suffering right now. I'd also say, like, again, same lens, but just again, how do we recalibrate? I mean, homelessness, all our core issues, like Candace said, are coming out now, and you're seeing them with the lights, all the lights on. So it's not a time to really shift away, but it's a time to double down and focus, and because some of these clear areas are crystallized for us. I know that all these things can't be done without, looking at our budget and how we're going to prioritize. And those are where the hard discussions come in about what are clear safety and life issues that we need to prioritize. What are clear areas where we need to, like, our government contractors did, unencumber our funds so that we can coalesce around this clear need over here. We need to be able to have those hard decisions and make those hard cuts if we need to.
And anything that you would name just off the top of your head that you think would fall under that?
Yeah, I mentioned them earlier. Probably any capital projects or development projects that definitely aren't around those core things around fire, life, safety, access. Things that in my organization, we've gone through times of, where we've had very successful resources and fundraising, and other times when the economy has impacted how much we get and how much we're able to contract for with the local government, and that's meant budget cuts or budget reductions. And we look at and we prioritize things as like, what are like essential services? Those are always prioritized first, and then what are the things that are great, essential, and have great outcomes, but we can quickly shift down and then rebuild back up with minimal disruption. And which are the ones, and then the third category, which are the ones that are great programs, but if we do shift back down, turn back down and shut it down, it would have tremendous impact and would take multiple years to ramp back up again, and we would lose that momentum. So that's how those are the lenses that we look at when we think about budget and prioritizing during hard times. It's not a perfect system, but at least it gives us the tools to kind of understand the trade-offs when we're making those decisions.
Ellen, I have to jump off for the news meeting. Candidates, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Amy or Laura, do one of you want to jump in with a question right now?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to follow up on some of the Portland police issues that we've had. As we all know, the Portland Police Bureau, still Justice Department settlement over use of force against those in mental health crises. The Bureau's own statistics show that traffic stops and arrests show a disproportionate focus on African Americans. And many in Portland have criticized the Bureau's handling of protests and counter-protests over last summer and summers before. At the same time, the Bureau is plagued by chronic understaffing, and it's become the first de facto, but at the same time, the Bureau has become the de facto first responders for incidents involving homeless people. So what should city leadership do to improve the Police Bureau operations and restore the community's trust in this really important agency? And Candace first.
So do you want to go first, Carmen?
Oh, that's right, Carmen. I'm sorry.
So yeah, those are multiple issues within that question. And all very much, very important. I think that generally City Council needs to, number one, be absolutely united in the steps that they all agree on, with a united voice to address systemic issues within the Bureau, first of all. And it really, to me, the underlying foundational issue is about culture change, and it's about systemic change in the Bureau. I believe that we need a more community-centered police force, and using more non-lethal weapons and less militarization of the police force. I also believe that we need to continuously train officers to correct for their own implicit racial biases and practices, and also to be reflective of areas of growth. Another one would be updating the psychological evaluation and hiring processes to ensure that new hires bring in the mindset that Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color are valued community members, and that also bring a mindset of problem solving and helping the vulnerable navigate towards systems of care that they need to stay safe. And I think leadership is really important in this, and that's why I think council needs to be united around this. We need to have a chief that wants to carry forth the work that Danielle Outlaw started with systems change in this way and rebuilding that community trust. I also believe that transparency about when things aren't working to the community has a very resonant impact with community. I think that they need to hear that we acknowledge what system and what problems that are within our system, and we want to work to address those problems together. I also think expanding the independence and the diversity of the independent review boards and bodies for accountability, that we lift up more victim experiences, and also expand our ways that we use restorative justice practices in those things. I think once community understands and sees that there's movement in that way, and that there's leadership alignment around that movement and those culture changes, I think we'll see trust increase. I also think that we'll have more success when recruiting officers of color to the Bureau and homegrown officers in our area, when we start having the ability for police to reflect and protect everybody. I think these are some of the changes. In terms of force at protests, I'm really concerned about use of force at protests, and I personally oppose these practices. I think there are other legal tools for officers when intervening with criminal intent, specific perpetrators. And I do believe, obviously, that our police force should be frontline in upholding our, First Amendment rights to protest, et cetera, and free speech. However, it should not also endanger other citizens that are there in order to protect them. So yeah, those are a few of my thoughts.
Well, you definitely hit all the high notes that I would have hit. So, I agree with a lot of what Carmen has said. And frankly, this issue is really important to me because it's the reason I decided to jump in this race. So, I'm the acting chair of the Citizen Review Committee right now because we just lost our chair of 4 years. She resigned recently in frustration after many, many years of buildup, but recent changes that really left us feeling like, is this accountability theater? Do we actually have the authority to be able to implement these suggestions that we as volunteers on this committee are putting a lot of hard time into? And how do we have all these barriers that come in, one of those being the auditor, in that, the auditor has played the kind of this like, I am the wall that you have to get through to get to council, and it's a problem. I'm very outspoken about this, and I definitely have, I'm closer to the issue just being in this work because, for example, we have been trying to change our standard of review on the Citizen Review Committee for many, many years. The current standard is a reasonable person standard, as opposed to what most people use, which is a preponderance of the evidence, right? So 51% more likely than not that the evidence shows that something has occurred or not. And the reasonable person standard really puts us in a bind because ultimately we end up being super deferential to the police and their first call, because we're an appeals board. So it's gone a couple layers by the time it gets to us, the citizens. And, you know, we had tried to put in that change. We were advocated, we lobbied all of the city councilors and the mayor, and we got like yeah, we're on board, we like this. And then the auditor was like, hard stop. And oh no, we can't do it until the contract negotiation, or we can't do it until this. And it's like, okay, so when can we do it? So that, you know, I obviously have a lot of pent up frustration about it, but I think that it's really at the core of so many of the issues, not only in PPB, but also in City Hall. Because I feel like you know, when it comes to these different boards that we have, whether it's police accountability or there's a multitude of commissions and committees that work within the government, right? And our role on these commissions is to offer perspective. It's to offer an outside look at how we think that things need to move forward. And we really need those leaders in City Hall to take that seriously and to give us, you know, honestly, the dignity at times that we're putting in work that matters. For example, we made a very crucial decision on a case, and actually your paper reported on it, because we made a decision that it was wrong for an officer to lie to a protester that he could be arrested if he kept filming. That was not correct. And it was, you know, that's a really important thing to not lie to somebody about. And we actually had a conference with the chief outlaw at the time, and we agreed. We came to an agreement, and we decided, yes, that was wrong, and there should be a punishment for that. And then I find out later in the Oregonian that the chief decided to go back on that decision and change the directive by which she put the discipline. So it made it like a one-day, no pay, you know, kind of discipline. And nobody told us. You know, we made that decision collectively, and supposedly the code says that we have the authority to do that, and it was completely disregarded. And then, you know, we bring it up, I bring it up with Mayor Wheeler, and it's like, oh, like there's just no answers. And I think that that has led to a lot of what people are feeling on the ground when it comes to police issues. I had a forum last year at PSU because I'm also the chair of the crowd control work group, which is where we talk about protests and use of force at protests. And we had actually a really good turnout. 30 people came out to tell us about their experiences. And, you know, they don't understand when the officers make the decisions to move in and use force. It's not clear why. It's not clear, you know, who it gets doled out to is, oh, how it happens to be more people of color. What a coincidence. And then, you know, there's just not a good voice, in my opinion, on City Hall where people are saying, hey, there's people on the streets protesting. They must care about something. We should probably say something about it and have some kind of statement and be proactive, because if people in Portland, we're very passionate. We like to go out and speak our minds. And I think that Portland City Hall leaders need to understand that and make sure that they're reflecting that and taking it seriously when they're making decisions moving forward. So I've got a lot of opinions. Obviously, I'm pent up, you know, because I really do feel that this is an important area that I want to address, and why I'm running, because I think that it's going to take not only political will, but, you know, City Hall needs to kind of hold the line, because PPB has a lot of leverage. The union has so much leverage in being able to just say, oh, by the way, officers, you don't need to attend CRC meetings. That's okay. So we often are left with like, well, we don't have your side of the story because you refuse to engage in good faith with this process and to care about the decisions or the recommendations that we're making that are going to help you interface better with the people. So I think that that is a huge point for City Hall that needs to be addressed.
Amy, do you want to jump into the question?
Sure, there we go. Sorry, I had to unmute a little. Switching gears a little bit, as we cope with the public health and economic crisis, I also wondered what your thoughts are. And I think, Candace, it's your turn to go first. Is that right? And I wondered what you would do to ensure that the arts and cultural scene that gives Portland its unique character comes out of this, you know, as healthy as possible.
Unmute myself there. That's a good question. And, you know, I have a lot of friends actually in the arts world, and I've been kind of just gauging from them, you know, what they're feeling about how this is all going about. And I, you know, I have a lot of struggling artist friends, so already they're burdened by the economy not giving them a lot of options, and then now one of the things that seems to be disposable is like the arts, right? And we can put our money elsewhere, but I think it really it's important, and you asked this question because you know it's important for Portland, because it is, and I think that the way that we invest in the arts and help use the arts to also lift up our spirits collectively, I think is going to be super important as we come out of this. So, I think that, of course, in addition to addressing all of the underlying economic issues and helping struggling people, not just struggling artists, but people being able to recover from this, and small businesses being able to recover, I think that it's really going to take initiative from City Hall to re-energize the city, and I think that investing it there is a really good start. As far as the funding, I mean, I think that the way, I guess, when we're talking about our priorities, right? We're talking about how we make budget priorities. I think we definitely shouldn't leave the arts at the bottom of the barrel, and I hope that they can be lifted up with the help that we're giving these small businesses when it comes to like the comedy spaces and the bars and all that, different art spaces, and then I hope that I don't know, maybe we have a regenerized idea of what it's going to take to lift ourselves up emotionally from this crisis too. So I know that's super general, but I get what you're saying, and I think that I definitely want to prioritize that moving forward.
And Carmen?
So can you repeat the question? So I just want to make sure I don't leave any piece out.
Sure. Just as we are addressing, in the middle of addressing the critical issues like public health and economics, I also wondered what you would do to ensure that the arts and cultural scene that gives our city its unique character comes out of this not completely, ripped to shreds.
I would really think about first our artists and our arts organizations. First, in terms of thinking about how we're addressing agencies and small businesses about meeting, their basic needs. So they're going to care about rent assistance. They're going to care about groceries and their safety and their health. So first off, I would say, focus on that to make sure that they're getting their basic needs met and they have avenues for that. I've seen several different efforts online and discussions happening about how do we support our artists during this time. Just, they're facing the same issues as everybody else, but they're going to be even harder hit, and the road back to the economic recovery is going to be even harder, all things remaining equal right now. And I happen to be on the Oregon Shakespeare Festival Board, and seeing hearing day to day the impact and the devastation of a whole way of life in Ashland because of these changes is devastating. And there's a lot of fear. There are a lot of people who are wondering, will we ever get back to that place that we were? Or people who are having to make life choices right now, if they can wait out this time there. And so those are some of the things that I think about when I think about how we bounce back and how we plan for economic recovery. And I think it goes back to when we talked in the earlier question about there are some things that have had to have a full stop now. One of them is being performances, being commissioning for large-scale community-based arts projects, arts in schools. All these things obviously can't happen now. But how do we start planning now? How do we start planning now for that recovery? And I think because arts has such a long-standing, it's so foundational to who Portland is, that we need to incorporate it in our economic recovery. And I agree with what Candace said about like City Council should really push for arts to be part of how we re-enter. I think that's an incredibly important step that needs to happen. How do we use artists, and how do we use bringing people together either virtually together or otherwise a new way of feeling that sense of connection. No one can do that better than artists can with us. So I think it would be a tremendous opportunity for once we're out of the road or out of this or at the end of the curve and we're starting to ramp up our economic recovery and re-entering the community, that we have that we invest in planning with artists about how we do this, how what they would want to see, and then also think about how communities could respond and re-engage and feel like that reconnection once again through the use of artists. Maybe there's an opportunity to partner around a project to bring people together, like we all came through this together. So I would love to think about that and plan with that and talk to arts organizations, particularly from multiple communities, about what that would look like. I think it's something that could be a bright spot in planning in this time.
Great, thank you. So housing and homelessness has been, it's a core issue for both of you. Can you, and I guess I'll start with Carmen first, give like one or two really specific policy ideas that you would champion to address either just the homelessness issue itself or just housing affordability as a whole?
Let's see. In terms of homelessness itself, I think that, obviously what we're seeing is like the result of decades upon decades of federal disinvestment in affordable housing, in mental health and substance abuse. So there are all these issues that have exacerbated what has been a growing housing problem already. So because we're at where we're at, there's obviously a lot of urgency now, which has been crystallized by this pandemic. And this issue is really personal to me because we were fairly housing unstable and moved multiple times as a child. And I understand now as a professional who works in education and social services, the impact of that on families, and particularly with child development and education opportunities are hugely truncated when they're not able to have stability in their lives. So that said, I think there are several things that the city could do. One, I want to say that I think that the city's joint office is working together with other local agencies and nonprofit partners, and I think they're really doing a really great job. I think they know what they need, what needs to happen. We just simply do not have the resource to meet the need of what this issue has now become. And that's really at the core of this. So I think one thing, which is a huge opportunity, is the Here Together Coalition and what's coming up for us in May to vote on around increased resources to a regional area, which is brilliant and great and much needed. And we're so thirsty for that. So that can bring supportive, permanent supportive housing services, family stability services, mental health supports, addiction and substance abuse programs, and other social services that are needed so that once houseless people are able to find a path into permanent housing, that they can stay there. It's not a path to nowhere where you're moving people around simply through a system that really doesn't have an end. This is really designed to create a permanent place for people to have the ability to live their lives safely and with ongoing support. And it is costly, but it's what we need to do as a community. We have said that that's a priority. We've passed bonds to that effect because we care about these things. And now it's time to pass this effort so that we have the resources to make sure that all those other investment work to their fullest utility. Other thing is increased rent assistance. That is incredibly important in this time. Obviously, there are other factors that weigh in on, national factors even, and international that have driven up the price of development and housing costs, et cetera, in this time. But there are things locally that we can do to kind of offset that as those other things are addressed in other ways. I run at the organization I'm at, we are a distributor of rent assistance to families in need and energy and utility assistance. And we see firsthand just how many people are in need, and that need is increasing, and we never have enough to meet the growing need. And so in this time, that is something that we know works. It's one strategy of many, but it is a tool that is helpful to people, and it prevents homelessness, and it prevents family instability, housing instability. I also think that it would be interesting for us to explore a local voucher system, so that we can create opportunities to find more ways so that people can actually move and find places to live over the long term. Because we know that folks who have been waiting for vouchers from the federal government have been waiting in some cases for years. So those are a few things that I think. I also think, sorry, one more. In terms of moving a little bit more into the affordable housing development side, because of this form of government, I feel like there are so many areas that have become really cumbersome or challenging in ways that probably don't need to be as challenging for affordable housing developers. The permitting process, and I think it's one thing that I mentioned in my write-up, is one of those things. I feel like there are ways that we can streamline permitting processes to move more quickly, so that we're not creating a more costly project at the end of the development, that then those costs get passed on to renters. So those are just a few ideas that I was thinking about.
Candace,
all the ideas, why don't you, Carmen? No, I'm just kidding. You said a lot of what I would have said. Those were good ideas, and I definitely echo a lot of what she said, because you know, we've been talking about these things. I think a lot of us, like, you know, Carmen said too, we know what to do, we just got to do it. We need more resources to do it. I do think two specific areas that I would mention. I really think we need to be better about building affordable housing affordably. And part of that is the permitting process. Part of that is I would like to see an innovation hub for how we are designing affordable housing. It doesn't all have to be another apartment building. It doesn't have to be, you know, let's just build the same structure all over the city. I think that the type of housing that people need has transformed a lot over the years too. I mean, especially in my generation, I mean, gosh, I don't have a family. I can't afford to have a family. So I don't need, you know, certain things that, you know, there are families that need housing. There are college students that just need temporary housing. Like, there's so many different needs, and I don't see the diversity of that in the housing market. So I think that that is what, you know, I would like to see an innovation hub to address. I also think that working at Portland State, when, you know, we have students, actually, we have a lot of students that are houseless and food insecure. And I built up the PSU food pantry. So I did a lot of work working with these vulnerable students and what their challenges were to get themselves fed and keep themselves housed, while also trying to go to school and, you know, enjoy their college career as well. And I think that from our approach, there's a lot that we could learn from the education world when it comes to case management. And I think that that's really where I want to see City Council move better at. There are lots of different services that are doing great work, you know, lots of different nonprofits, community organizations that are addressing houselessness and housing in all these little pockets. And how is City Hall doing a good job of being collaborative in all of that, but also, what am I trying to say? Connecting the care. So, you know, people that become houseless, it's so many different factors. It's not just I don't have the ability to put myself in a house. It's I have mental health challenges. I'm struggling with an abusive partner. You know, I can't get a job. Those kinds of things. And so I really want to see us be better about that. And I want to. What I hear from housing advocates is that that's where they need to see the city go, is being a better connector of those resources. The joint office is a really good start in that way. And I also believe that, again, I'll say, we're not going to have housing for everybody overnight. What are we doing right now to help people that are out there? So when I say case management, I'm also talking about self-governed spaces, because I think that if we can create more spaces like that, so people aren't so dispersed, but also because housing or houselessness, a lot of it is about broken relationships. You know, I feel like I'm in a situation where I don't think I'll ever become unhoused, because I know I have family to fall back on. I have built these systems that hopefully I'm still going to have. And so much at the core of when you what you see in the houseless community is that lack of that relationship somewhere. And so that's why I think that those self-governed spaces are super important, because it's about building those relationships. Street Roots is really good at this, and I so appreciate their work. You know, they give these folks the dignity of work, they give them a community to support them. And then I just saw the other day, it was like, so-and-so, you know, is housed now, yay, here are the keys. And, you know, I think that that's really important into how we're combining our compassion and our policy, and making sure that relationships is at the core of how we're addressing the housing issue. And that is going to come with more coordinated care.
Great. Well, we just have a few more minutes. I think, Laura, you had another question, right, about form of government?
This is something that you guys both said throughout the conversation today, but also I believe in the surveys, and it's something that's important to the editorial board in terms of revisiting the charter work to reorganize Portland city government. Obviously, it's part of the charter work, but just kind of looking at what could happen down the road. And I could see the argument being made, is now a good time to overhaul our leadership in the midst of a recovery that could extend 1, 2, 3 years out. So would you let that happen? How do you feel about the process of changing our city government? Do you stick to it?
And I think I'm first, yes?
Okay, thank you. I'd love
What? Sorry, I missed that.
Yes, go ahead. I lost track of who was first. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Yes, I absolutely would continue to pursue it, because I truly believe it's at the root of so many of our problems, and this is the time to do it. I think that as we're going to need to have different ways to approach our recovery, it's going to need to include how our government is structured. I believe the charter review process is a really, that needs to be where it happens. I know that there have been multiple efforts over the years. Of course, we all know, right? It's failed 8 different times, or whatever the number is. And in my opinion, I think that it's great to have these different organizations that are pushing for this change. And I see like City Club moving in that direction, coalitions of communities of color, and I appreciate that work. And I also think that it needs to happen within the charter review process. It's built into the structure, or the way that we change our government in general. And I think having it come from City Hall and putting that pressure in City Hall to say that you need to lead on this. Don't leave it to these organizations to come up with their ideas for, you know, what it is that we need to do to change. You need to start thinking about it from your everyday, how you're managing your bureaus, and start brainstorming how you're going to shift into this different kind of government. So I want to see that work happening now, not only in creating the commission, but really the city council taking a hard look at what that's going to look like to need to shift it. And there's logistical issues, there's coalition building issues, right, that we're going to have to get through in order to make that happen. But I think there's definitely a political will for it among, you know, the city leaders and insiders and the people. And I also just think, again, you know, when it comes to representation and how people are heard in City Hall and how they're reflected in the decisions that are getting made, that geographical representation is going to be super crucial. And I'll say this, because I keep hearing this argument, and I disagree with it for a few reasons. There's this argument that the geographical change, you know, having districts is not going to solve the problem of having diverse voices represented, because not all, you know, people of color live in one part of town. I disagree with that argument wholeheartedly, because I think that changing to the districts, the goal of that is getting the money out of the politics. Right now, it is extremely difficult to run a citywide race, especially for me. I'm an insider, or not an insider. I'm not an insider. I'm new to this game, but I'm very passionate. I have a lot of not only lived experience, but transferable skills in my work as an educator at Portland State. PSU is very much a microcosm of the city of Portland. And I feel that I've been able to navigate those systems. And I think that being able to have a district that your win number is much lower, there's much less ground that you need to cover, we're going to be able to lift voices of different communities no matter what. Not just because, oh, well, we don't have a slice of a district that is just where Black people live. That's ridiculous. We're electable everywhere. And so I think that it's really, the district representation is super important to me, because I think that's going to be a good start to addressing who gets in City Hall and how their voices are being reflected.
Great. And Carmen?
So the question was about if we should proceed given this time of the current. Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Oh, was that
Sorry. Yeah, no, I had just said that indeed this is going to be part of the charter review process, but I can also anticipate arguments of should we really be overhauling our city government at a time of intense economic recovery that we could see in a period of time. So how would you address those concerns if people brought them up, and how important is it to you that we move forward?
Yeah, I would not see that as a reason to stop moving forward the discussion of change of form of government. I think that if anything, it crystallizes why more representation from all corners of our city are important in these kinds of discussion. So I wouldn't also hasten it for that reason. I'm very supportive of it happening both through the charter review process, but not solely in the charter review process. And part of the reasoning for that is because we've seen in the past where a recommendation for charter review may have come forward, but it didn't necessarily get adopted by council. So we do need an avenue for community if there is groundswell from community. And hopefully our leadership will be aligned so that whether it happens via council and charter review, or whether it happens from the community side in partnership with council, that both are valid avenues to proceed. I also believe that districts are important ways to create more access and more representative city government. And we're seeing that our form of government now, since the creation of our form of government here in Portland, we've only elected, I think, 8 women and 3 people of color. And so it is really hard, like Candace mentioned, for anyone who truly represents their neighborhood or their community. That's one thing, that you can have all the credibility that one needs, yet raising hundreds of thousands of dollars is a whole entirely different thing to reach every single voter in the city of Portland. And then what you get then are people who are representing that are only people that can afford to run. And so it is really important to make sure via districts that we have the ability to elect leaders from neighborhoods that are not only smaller geographically for that money reason, but also smaller geographically so that there's more local accountability to your elected official. Right now, you can, if there's an issue on your street corner that may involve 2 to 3 different bureaus and maybe 1 to 3 different commissioners. And there's no, there's no timeline. There's no sense of like one-on-one interfacing other than talking to their staff and maybe the bureau. But if you're not getting traction that way, it's very challenging to kind of follow your project through multiple avenues. So it creates bad public, not real a good community service for our own residents when they're trying to navigate their own government in their own neighborhoods. So I think this is one avenue to make government more responsive, truly responsive to its residents. It's also harder, I think, on staff and also harder on bureaus, I think, to coordinate and to really align. And that's why I think a city manager would be a great capacity builder for the city in that way, and that it could help thread projects through multiple bureaus and through multiple initiatives.
Yes, to the city manager. I agree with that.
Great. Thank you guys so much for coming, or for calling in, and for all your time and your thoughtful responses. This was a really great conversation. We will be coming out with our endorsements toward the end of the month, or first week of May. And if we need to follow up with you, we can just is email or the best way to reach both of you?
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. Thank you again. We really appreciate it. It was a really great conversation.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.